Okay, well, anyway, welcome to the second chowder lecture of the 2024 season. My name is Linda Jenkins, and on behalf of the Board of Trustees of the Pickering Foundation, I thank you for being here on Super Bowl Sunday. As somebody just said, go Pats. We'll get you out of here and let you talk, don't worry. So we have two more events this spring. The first is a talk by author Ann Parson, who is with us on Zoom. Hello, Ann. And who, as many of you know, is the author of our own The House That John Built. But on February 25th at 4:00 in the afternoon, she'll be presenting us with a look at her new book, The Birds of Dog, which is filled with lost stories about America's first scientists, including more than one Pickering. Come on up, Stanley. Then on March 3rd, we come back for a final chowder lecture in the spirit of Rev 250, when Charlie Newhall and Bob Urbetta will present a lively talk, I'm sure, commemorating Salem 1774 and Pickering's plan for the militia. So I think that's going to be a really important lecture and enjoyable. You won't want to miss either one. I was about to read my next line, which was today we welcome, but today we have two welcomes. Before we welcome ChrisBurke, many of you have been asking and hearing rumors and what's happening because you know that Tim and I are leaving at the end of March. Who's taking over? Who's your replacement? Oh, well, I want to introduce you to VJ Joyce. We'll hear a lot more about VJ and his wife Chrissy, who are going to move in sometime probably this summer.
I think so, it looks good, yeah.
Summer, after little work is done in the house. You can see we're frantically working on the outside. There'll be some inside work as well. And then they will come in and cast their personalities on the house, and we're very excited about that. So thank you for saying yes.
Thank you so much. Look forward to meeting you all in the future as well and spending more time with you.
And there'll be a big announcement at the party in June, so don't miss that either. But today we welcome longtime Salemite ChrisBurke, who I'm sure many of you know, who will take us on a walk with Henry David Thoreau and his Salem friend, John Russell Lewis, who visited, and I love this word, botanized together in the 1850s. Chris served as a public defender in the Commonwealth of Kentucky and now works as a criminal defense attorney with an office in Lynn. Along with Bruce Piper, where is Bruce? There he is. Chris established the local nonprofit, the Salem Native Nursery, which advocates for planting native plants in gardens and landscapes. So with that, please join me in welcoming ChrisBurke.
These seats here are super handy. Okay.
Always promising when you shuffle your papers around. See if we can get the here we go. We're in. All right, well, I want to thank you to the Pickering House version of a Super Bowl party. Open bar, food, and a rowdy crowd.
That's it. Carol?
I want to acknowledge Michael Leary, who's here in the front, and Marilyn Humphreys, who helped me with my research. We took a ride around Gloucester to recreate the walk that Thoreau and Russell took. Michael lives in Gloucester, and he took us down these little roads and found us the obscure beaches that they found on foot. And so we had a great day. It was a really clear day, just a wonderful time. We all held the journal notes that Thoreau took that day, and we could look out and see the things that he saw. So it was a very nice day. So the title is Sauntering Through Concord Marblehead. And I use the word sauntering because that's Thoreau's word. That's the way he said he walked through life, sauntering. We wrote about it, used that title.
You should play the slideshow so it looks. Like up somewhere to slideshows, go in,
Go for that.
yeah, click on that and then play.
Thank God for Carol.
From the beginning, yeah. And then flip, watch.
Thank you.
There you go.
Ah, that's better.
And then you just use the arrow buttons to move on.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks, Carolyn. All right, so, these fellows, Thoreau and Russell, took 3 trips together, 3 walks. And obviously the more well-known fellow here is Henry David Thoreau, and people know him. John Lewis Russell was 9 years older than Thoreau, and he was a professional botanist. He was also a minister. He went to Harvard, graduated from the Harvard Divinity School. I'll go to this next screen here for a moment, and then I might go back. So here's his stats. Born in Salem, lived at Lafayette Street. His dad was a banker, owned a bank. So John Lewis, it didn't seem like he was hurting for money. It didn't seem like he was rich, but he could indulge his botany and get into it full time. I'm gonna read a little passage in this book. And if I have it marked, Ray Angelo, great botanist, still with us, was in Concord for 20 years in this Harvard Extension office. He is like the only person that has commented on Russell and Russell's skills. So he says, aside from Asa Gray, virtually all the other botanists in New England at this time, they were amateurs. The most knowledgeable of all of these that Thoreau met was John Russell of Salem. He was a Unitarian minister, and for 40 years he was professor of botany and vegetable physiology at the Massachusetts Horticultural Society. And then he became a fellow at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. The point is that Thoreau was a total rank amateur, and he didn't have access to the great botanists of his time. The 2 chief botanists being Asa Gray, a quiet botanist at Harvard. He worked in the studio, getting correspondence from everybody, putting together his manual. Eventually, he published a book that became the Bible for all the botanists. It was just a great book. The other great botanist, not so much botanist, but naturalist, was Louis Agassiz. And he was also at Harvard. Agassiz got all the publicity. He loved to talk in front of an audience. He came over from Europe. He gave lectures. They were sold out. Harvard just loved him, brought him in, he gave him a building, a lot of graduate students. They really built him up. But the problem with Lewis is he loved the crowds, and all his great research that he was doing over in Europe, he kind of fell back on his laurels. But Asa Gray was pushing forward. And if we have time at the end and we start talking about Darwin, I'll talk about how Agassiz went down a dead end, and Asa Gray accepted Darwin. And our 2 heroes that we're talking about today, they also accepted Darwin's theories. This right here is the Russell Bolete, and that's the common name for it. I won't even wrestle with the Latin name for it. But it's a fairly uncommon mushroom that John Lewis Russell popularized. And it was his place to popularize it because he was the leading expert at the time in cryptogams, not cryptograms, with an R. And I don't say many R's, cryptograms, but cryptogams. And what they are plants that reproduce without seeds or flowers.
Really?
And so you have mushrooms, ferns, lichens. That was his expertise. And people from all around the country would write letters to John Lewis Russell. John Lewis Russell founded the Essex County Natural History Society about 1840. And when he founded that, the people he founded it with was this fellow named Oakes, who was an expert on the White Mountains, but lived up in Newburyport. And the other fellow was a Salem naturalist, and his name was Wheatland. So the three of them, along with a few other people, but they were the prime people, they formed the Natural History Society here in Essex County. And John Lewis Russell had this specialty of cryptogams. And so when other people like Jacob Bigelow, he had the best botany book before Asa Gray's. When he published his book, he would write to John Russell and say, do you see any mistakes, anything I missed? And similarly, Asa Gray consulted him about cryptograms. So he was recognized as the top dog when it came to that. Let's see. I'm getting ahead. Let's see. I went ahead. Oh, here we go. I was gonna go back. Oh, yeah. Here's the two pictures. This drawing of Thoreau was done at the time these two first met. And they first met in 1854. I don't know when that drawing of John Lewis Russell was taken. But you see, he's into his plants. He's not afraid to go out and post plant like that, you know. And I can relate to his haircut. So that's a good one. You can see Russell was a real professional in his drawings. These are the shells. A big part of the Essex County Natural History Society was shells, and they collected them at Lynn Beach and all around Essex County. So even though cryptograms is his thing, he's also, back then, naturalists did everything, you know. And here's another drawing there. I think what happened here was, he wrote this as Coreodalis, one type plant, but then later, either the name changed for it or he corrected himself when I looked these up. And I kind of forget what that plant is. The Natural History Society joined with the Essex County History Society, and together they formed the Essex Institute. The Essex Institute was a big thing, and important thing in Salem. I mean, they had money. They built this building and had this wonderful library. The Salem Athenaeum rented space from them and housed their books there for a while before they built this building here
It
on
was the other way
Essex
around.
Street.
Sorry, Chris, we rented to them.
Yeah.
We own the building, yeah. Carolyn Plummer, sorry, not to.
Oh, yeah.
Just.
Thank you. Well, what do I want to say about this? I just wanted to say that back then, this was no small thing. And later, if we have time, when we get into this breakup with Louis Agassiz and Asa Gray, a big contingent of Agassiz people came to the Essex Institute and to our Peabody Museum and found work here because they hated Lewis so much.
Or hated Agassi? Agassi.
Yes, Louis Agassiz. All right. I keep doing this, the button. I usually- All right, so let's get into the first meeting. The day they first met, Lewis and Thoreau was August 15th, 1854. There was a lot of connections between Salem botanists and Concord botanists. So the hub is Boston, Asia Gray, the Harvard Natural History Department. But the second most important natural history node was Salem. And these people are, John Lewis Russell was important, Wheatland was important, Oakes up in Newburyport is contributing. So Salem's important. And there are also, I would say the third biggest node in Massachusetts is Concord. Concord has the transcendentalists who are all into natural history, but not in a scientific way. John Lewis Russell was friendly with Ralph Waldo Emerson. In fact, he went to Concord and visited Ralph Waldo about 5 or 6 years before he met Thoreau, and it may be through him that they met. Ray Angelo thinks so in his book when he writes about the botany in Massachusetts. He thinks that's how these two got together, but it's really not known. If you look at the correspondence to John Lewis Russell up at the Peabody Museum, the library up in Rowley, you'll see he has about 4 different correspondents from Concord. One of the guys he corresponds with is this guy named Pratt. Pratt was the head farmer at Burke Farm. Pratt was good fellow, good friends with Hawthorne. Hawthorne was one of the original people at Burke Farm. Hawthorne's wife, Miss Peabody, Sophia Peabody, I believe, was also one of the original people at Burke Farm. So Thoreau is very friendly with the Hawthornes. We can get into that, how he took Hawthorne out on his boat and showed him around when Hawthorne was living in Concord. So anyway, there's a lot of different opportunities for Thoreau to meet John Lewis Russell. We don't know how he did it. But they make a plan, and John Lewis Russell comes to Concord. It was a bad day that Thoreau met Lewis Russell. Thoreau got lost in the woods. Thoreau was supposed to meet him at the train, but he didn't. So there was this Miss McKay. That was a rooming house, so John Lewis Russell made his way to Miss McKay's on her own. That's where he was gonna stay that night. Thoreau went out with Ellery Channing, and they went for a walk in the woods. And Thoreau kind of blames this incident on Channing. But it's kind of strange, because Thoreau has his compass, and he's walking in the woods, and they're heading west. And then he sees Ellery Channing found a trail, and Ellery prefers to walk on the trail. That's what he says in the journal. So they take this trail, but it's a trail they hadn't been on, and they walk and they walk and they walk. And in his journal, he says, we're completely lost. And they climb a hill, climb a tree, they look out, they see a church steeple, and he thinks it's a church steeple for Westford, but actually it's a church steeple for Acton.
Oh my God.
And they're only 13 miles apart. Quite a ways. But finally, they make their way back to Concord, Channing and Thoreau, and they meet John Lewis Russell at Miss McKay's, the rooming house. And John Lewis Russell brings his powerful microscope, and Thoreau loves it. It's a 900 power thing or something. He says 900 circumference. I don't know what that means, but I suppose what you see in the circle is magnified 900 times. I'm not sure. But anyway, this is a drawing that Thoreau makes in the margin of his journal. He's always making these little unprofessional looking drawings, but they're effective because he's saying what he sees is a pickerel weed here. This is the pickerel weed. This is the first thing that Russell shows him. And this is the cross section that Thoreau sees in the microscope.
Wow.
And so they look at a few things, through the microscope, and Thoreau describes that, and I think he really liked it, you know, looking at things through a microscope. I would say Thoreau had a telescope. He spent a lot of money on this telescope, and he used it a lot. He looked out at distant trees and horizons and things. But I think this was the first time he looked through a microscope, at least a quality microscope. So he liked it. All right, this is a great thing. Bruce Piper invited me on this little hike. And it's not a Salem connection here. John Dick, who lives over on Hawthorne Street, is a wetland scientist, retired. And the first thing that Thoreau wanted to show John Lewis Russell was this climbing fern. It's a pretty rare plant. If you look in the Go Botany, the Native Plant Trust website, it isn't exactly endangered, but it says, I forget the word they use, threatened. Here's the next slide. So it's called the climbing fern, Ligonia palmatum. Thoreau would only show this plant to people that he wanted to impress or people that he wanted to like. He would make wreaths out of it for his sisters. And he found it while he was doing surveying this place called the Ministerial Swamp. Apparently it was land that was set aside for the town ministers at one time, and then someone bought it and they hired Thoreau to go survey it. So he saw this fern, he recognized it as a pretty rare fern, and he refers to it in his journal over the years quite a few times, when he would go see it, when he would make a wreath for his sister, things like that. But I'm gonna go back the slide here. So this Ray Angelo that I'm talking about, he wrote the foreword to this great book. And it's all about Concord and the plants and all that, and Thoreau. And like I said, he gives Russell his due, and no one else that I can find does. So Ray Angelo, back in the 1970s, located this plant because he went to the Concord Library and he found Thoreau's original notes from that survey.
Oh, wow.
And then in 2019, John Dick, so about 50 years after Angelo found it, brought our group out. And this is John Dick right here, just lives up the street. He took us out and he knew how to work these things. I wouldn't, you know, I don't know what all this stuff means. But he found the plant, he got in there, hurrah, he brought out a group of his students. Bruce got the notice of the trip and that pulled me along, so I was so happy. At the time, I didn't know what I was looking at. Now I appreciate it.
Wow.
John Lewis Russell appreciated it. It might have been his reason for that first trip to Concord was to see this plant. He came back and he wrote it up in one of the botany journals at the time. And so he liked it. He was impressed. Let's see. Right here. Oh, here's a close-up of the climbing fern. All right, that same day, they go out and so that's the morning hike to that place. In the afternoon, they go look for these things, and the biologists in the room can pronounce it better than me. But they find like 4 different examples of potamogens, tons, but it just various, you know, pond weed types. But it was something Russell was interested in. In the course of that, if you read in the journal, you'll see that Russell takes the opportunity to tell Thoreau, or at least Thoreau's memory that night when he's writing in the journal, is Russell drops like 4 names on him, you know? People that I've already mentioned, like Oakes, like another fellow from Oxford, if there's any. Anyway, this is what Thoreau wants to get from Russell. He wants to know who's the expert in this plant, who's the expert in that plant, and then Thoreau can correspond with these people on his own. And Russell's happy to provide that. And he's, you know, as they're going along in the afternoon, by the way, they're in a boat. And that's that first picture I showed you when they're in that canoe looking thing. That's Russell in the front, Thoreau in the back, and Thoreau put that in the margin of his journal that night. You'd think it was just you know, a nice little thing, like a gesture, you know, oh, you were up. But the reason for that, that little drawing that he made was a demonstration of how reflection is in the water. And so he would do that. He was, Thoreau was into reflections. He liked the microscope, he liked the telescope. Later on, when he's touring Gloucester and he looks way up and he can see Maine and he sees a mountain floating in the air. He's into optical illusions. He likes this visual stuff with the light and he's trying to understand it. So as they're walking along, they see a rock with this type of lichen on it. And Russell tells them what it is, and Thoreau notes it in his journal that night. He says it looks like Egyptian writing to him. So that afternoon and that morning, like each trip they take, Thoreau is writing down 20, 30 different plants that Russell is teaching him as he's going along. And at this time, 1854, Thoreau is getting very sophisticated in his science compared to when he was more poetic and looking at science when he was a younger man. At that time, he's getting a transcendental experience. He's like experiencing the woods. Now he wants to look at it, he wants to understand it. He tells his sister, I'm getting very boring, I'm getting very scientific. He says it kind of tongue in cheek, because this is what he wants to do. This is how he wants to understand the world. But he's a little embarrassed by it too. He said, I'm losing something, I'm losing my poetry. He doesn't use those words, those are my words. That's the way I understand them. This is a picture I took on the bank of the Concord. So up here we have the Assabet River, and to the left we have the Sudbury River. And this is the confluence at a place that Thoreau calls Egg Rock. Behind these trees are a big glacial erratic giant boulder. Calls that Egg Rock. And this is the Concord River that begins here once those two rivers join. About a quarter mile down the road is the old manse and the North Bridge. And so this is looking back towards downtown Concord. And the two rivers come together. Thoreau spent a ton of time on these rivers, recording what he saw, all the different plants, all the interactions of the plants and animals. He was really into the, what's the word, the dynamic nature of nature. He wanted to know the interactions, the action that's going on. And he was not, say like Louis Agassiz or even Asia Gray. They were more into recording it, writing big manuals about listing everything. He wasn't into the list so much. That day they go out, the first thing that they're looking for is this plant, the yellow water lily. So he takes them out on his boat. They look at another water lily. In his journal, Thoreau writes it down as Hydropopeltis. But that's what they were still using, Michaud's description of it. Michaud was a French botanist who came over to the United States and, recorded a lot of plants. Now, a modern word for it is Brasenia. You can tell I have not been trained in botany. All right. This trip here, looking at these water lilies, was the second trip that Russell took to Concord. They had one day together, they spent it in the boat the whole time, and they were searching out these water lilies. So these few plants that I point out, I do because they were the plants that they set out to look at, that Thoreau promised me. I'm gonna show you these plants if you come. But along the way, they're looking at 20, 30 plants. They're looking at many, many plants. And this was one of the goals, to look at this and also this when they came out. You can see at this time that Russell's interest is in these aquatic plants. And that's what he wants Thoreau to show him. Around here, we don't have the ponds and the rivers like they do in Concord. They're moving slow out there. They have more swamps. And so Thoreau could show Russell some plants that he hadn't seen before. All right, so this brings us to the big trip when Russell came out here to Salem. Strike that one. Thoreau came out here to Salem. I believe Thoreau stayed at Lafayette Street. This house was a house that John Lewis Russell owned. His dad owned it before him. His dad was a banker here in Salem, and so they had a little bit of money, and he inherited this house. John Lewis Russell was married, but not, they didn't have any children. At the time, Thoreau is visiting him here in Salem. He doesn't have a congregation. Earlier in his life, John Lewis Russell had a congregation in, he had two, one down on the South Shore and then one up near New Hampshire. All his material is really intact at the PEM, and that's because he was, a major player in the Essex Institute. He's like the top guy. At different times, he's a second. Once the two institutions joined, he was like vice president or whatever. So he was someone whose papers they kept and they thought were important, even though he's not famous and people don't write about him. He has 4 linear feet of just notes and notebooks and things like that. So Thoreau comes out to meet him, and the first thing they do is to go to the, he visited one museum on one day and then the Phoebe Museum on the second day. So the first day they go to the Essex Museum in the morning, and then in the afternoon they take a walk around Marblehead Neck. They walk down Lafayette Street, they go to above the lead mills, and they walk out to Marblehead Neck. Thoreau is a little bit interested in the lead mills there because his family made pencils, and Thoreau had invented a few things about making pencils. His family inherited this little lead mine up in New Hampshire, and it was a really quality lead mine. So they had like a boutique pencil making, and for a little while they were the best pencils in the world. And Thoreau,
Were they used for the sketches, probably?
so I'm sure he used his own pencils. And Thoreau himself invented a little thing to grind that down very fine. And once he did that, and once they got a few people working for them making the pencils, again, that freed up Thoreau to pursue these things. So they're walking out Lafayette Street. They walk And this is Thoreau describing, the way he's walking, they walk above the tracks. So that puts them maybe in Gotchel Park, walking across Marblehead. And then the next landmark he talks about is this churn, which is out on Marblehead Neck. He calls it the spout. Dan Dixie, Marblehead historian, says, oh, the churn, the spout, same place. And so he describes that, and as they go along, describes a few of the plants he sees, a lot of goldenrods, things like that. All right, this next thing. This is the way Thoreau wrote it in his journal, the Dungeons of Salem, exclamation point, exclamation point. I think he did that tongue in cheek because he was saying, I think what he was saying with that was, leave it to Salem to make this thing so dramatic. But what we have here is Legs Hill, where the Marblehead YMCA is now. You recognize the road that goes around the Marblehead YMCA. And in that land from Legs Hill down to Vintage Square was kettle ponds and dry type kettle ponds. They were like a salad bowl, one after another. It was like someone had put big bombs on it. And this was a natural formation that was formed where the glacier stopped. It had carved out the bowls. It had left a layer of ice and then filled in with water. But some were shallow enough that they didn't hold water. So if you look at it, the things are really steep. Now it's been kind of flattened out because it's where the glacier stopped. It left a lot of gravel. The Mackeys owned a big piece of that land and took a lot of gravel out for construction. A neighborhood was built right here, and this pond has expanded now. And over here right now is Marblehead has some wells, so it's Salem land. Marblehead has a deed to the land, and they have wells over there. You can kind of sneak in, which I've done, and looked at that pond below the YMCA. They call it Koi Pond because that pond was the first place in America where they used duck decoys. And, but it's kind of a hidden away pond in there. And they call it, so it was an amazing landscape though. So he called it the Dungeons, exclamation point, we returned to the house by way of the dungeons. This section of town was a remarkable area. In this place, John Sears, who wrote this book in 1904, he devotes more time to this little section of Salem than any other place in Essex County when he's describing geological formations in Salem. That was how kind of strange what a moonscape this place was. And he has a lot of pictures in this book about what it looked like that this really doesn't do it justice, but you see here the cames and kettle holes, cames of the ridges, the kettle holes that was formed. But see how deep they are, they're very deep. This might have been Vintage Square at that time.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's the place he's describing. So this is the top of Legs Hill before the Mackeys owned it. I'm not saying the Mackeys did anything on it, just like everything around here gets all shaped. But this is what the top of Legs Hill looked like when he was taking pictures about 1905. All right, the next day, so that was their walk around out to Marblehead, around the neck, and they come back. The next day, they're in the Magnolia Swamp up in Magnolia. And this is the reason, you know, when they're looking ahead and thinking, what are we gonna see and do? This was the place that John Lewis Russell wanted to show Thoreau. Back in so this is 1858, their third trip together, their third walk together. Several years before, John Lewis Russell had written to Thoreau and said, I'm looking at the sweet bays up here in Magnolia. I saw that today. He includes it in his letter. It was significant enough that Thoreau quotes him in his journal that evening and notes that they did that. So I think it was like one of the focuses of what they wanted to look at. The significance of this magnolia up there is that the next closest place that it grows naturally is down in the Hamptons in New York on the east side. People knew about these magnolias very early on, like early in the 1700s. Botanists are writing about it, and what a significant thing it is that they took this huge jump up to magnolia. This area of Magnolia used to be known as Kettle Cove, and the actual cove down there is still called Kettle Cove, but they changed the name to Magnolia because it was kind of a tourist thing to talk about these magnolias. There was a little bit of business at the time of picking the magnolia flowers and selling them at the train station. So it was kind of a well-known thing. And this particular picture I took in Ravenswood. It was taken in January. So you see this plant is an evergreen. I hope in the summer, and when it's blooming, it's a little more significant. But up in Ravenswood, it's just a beautiful place. So many flowering shrubs, viburnums. That these sweet bay magnolias, to me, visually aren't the big draw up there, but botanically, they're very significant because they're so far north. So, that first night, this jumps way ahead in their walk. So we gotta back up. So that first night, they have their dinner about 2 miles from Gloucester. They set their fires using I forget the name of it. Anyway, they have little campfires. They're having a tough time finding fresh water. Thoreau mentions a couple times how they have to carry their water like a quarter of a mile to find good water up there. And they have a little cookout. They go into Gloucester and they find a rooming house and they stay there that night. So they've walked from Salem all the way to Gloucester. Literally? Next day they get up and they start walking and they take a shore route. They go to what's now Good Harbor Beach. And they continue to walk around Cape Ann, all the way around Cape Ann. Thoreau is looking at all the rocks and different formations out from Rockport, and he knows a little bit about this because he's really studied the maps. Because he was a Frenchman and he felt a little slighted that the English get all the credit for discovering all these landmarks around New England. But he felt like Champlain and French explorers got slighted. So when he wrote his book about Cape Cod, he does an incredible history of all the French explorers that explored New England. So he's describing these places. He's in Rockport. He's looking out. And he's describing all these places in Maine that he can see in southern New Hampshire. And the reason why he knows that is because he's already expert on it. He's gone to Harvard. He's pulled out all the old maps, all the primary sources on what these explorers saw. So we, Michael and Marilyn, we went around. Michael was able to show us all the beaches that he references that I've kind of skipped over here. But we come around to Folly Cove. Let me see. Yeah, so here we are at Folly Cove. Folly Cove is on the Annisquam side of Rockport. And here he describes, and you can't see it with my thing, but looking up to Maine, this is where he sees the mountain floating in the thing. And I can't remember, but I think, Michael, we saw that. didn't
We did, yeah.
Yeah,
Mount Agamenticus,
yeah,
Agamenticus.
thank you.
On a clear day, you can see it easily.
You can see it from there, so. And then he describes another hill or mountain to the left, he knew the name of that. But it's amazing to me that he's walking around here, seeing all this thing for the first time. And he can name these landmarks way up in the distance and he knows what they are. He's a very smart guy.
Yeah.
Right. This is a house that we passed and this is the route they took based on his journal. And this was 1826, so he was there in 1858. So this house was about 30 years old when he and Russell walked by it.
Just went up for sale, actually. That house, it did, yeah.
Wow.
They got a garage edition on the side of it. Yeah.
What a crowd we have.
Downtown Common.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
That does well, Joe.
here's the whale's jaw in, he said, we made tea underneath a leaning rock. The only rock that's big enough, probably, that they described would be this. And if you cut in, as he says they did, to head back to town at about where the Annisquam Road goes off, the whale's jaw is just a little bit north of that. And I'm sure this is one of the features that Russell wanted to show him. And it gives a good look at what it looked like, what Dogtown looked like. You see all the boulders, and Thoreau describes it, all the boulders, and then it got dark, and they had their fire, and he's just describing how all the boulders look at night, which was extraordinary. Whale's Jaw doesn't look like that now. Just like Thoreau, a lot of people have had their campfires underneath it, and eventually that big rock in front fell over or broke.
It broke. Yeah, the one on the left cracked and.
Yeah. Now, they walked through Dogtown, at night. They walked around Cape Ann, took them, and then they had dinner, and then the sun went down. They were walking in September 1858. This comet was building all summer, and about when they walked, September 22, 1858, it had built to its biggest amount. I think it lasted another week or two, and then it passed. Called Donati's Comet. It was the biggest comet of the century. And he said as we walked, it was over our right shoulder, which made sense. The comet came out of the north sky, and at times it came out of the Big Dipper. So you get the North Star here, the Big Dipper circles around the North Star, really close to the North Star. And this painting was by, I forget his first name, but Turner, the great portrait painter from England, an exhibition in Boston with his paintings. This is Donati's Comet. It was quite a night, because you had Donati's Comet, it was a clear night, and it was a full moon. And Jim Doyle liked this, he said when he got to where they were staying that night in Gloucester, and looked out over the harbor, he described it looked like Venice to him, Gloucester Harbor. All right, so that is the slideshow. And looks like I have about 8 minutes. I want to talk a little bit about these fellows and how open-minded they were, and when 1860, when The Origin of Species came out, how both of them seemed to be receptive, but other botanists around Salem were not. So, as I said, there were two bright lights in this area. We have Louis Agassiz and Asa Gray. Louis had gone down this road where he was hooked on the crowds and the he was just a speaker. Also, Harvard had gifted him, let me think if I can think of the name of it, the TZM, the Zoological Museum, brick and mortar building. So he spent a lot of money on him. Asa Gray is in his studio, and he's doing the tough work of actually teaching undergrads, like I said, corresponding with botanists all over, compiling his manual of botany, which later became like the go-to version. So now Asa Gray had a special connection with Darwin. Darwin saw something that Asa Gray was writing, had written up, and he wrote to Asa Gray and said, you know, that helps this theory I'm working on. And it was something about the mutation of conifers. And Asa Gray stressed that Darwin, for like 40 years, had been studying mutations of species. His theory was that species changed. Louis Agassiz was stuck in this thinking like from Genesis. He believed that species was static, that God would create a new species all over if there was like a gap. So when Darwin's describing, you know, 5 different finches with different beaks, Agassiz's theory on that is that God created 5 different type of finches, whereas Darwin's thinking, no, I think they're separated, they're mutating. They didn't have DNA, so they didn't know. Darwin first expressed all this like 30 years before he wrote The Origin of Species he published it actually December 1859. So for like 30 years, he wrote it up, all the different parts of it. He says, these things are mutating slowly, so slowly we can't even comprehend it. And the next generation has as many successes as failures. But it's the competition within the species to survive that favors the favorable mutation. There was a fellow back in the 1820s, Lamarck, and his theory was that species would evolve the way they need it. The giraffes' necks would get longer and longer because that benefited them. But Darwin is saying, no, their necks get smaller and larger regardless. But the guys with the larger necks, they do better. So each generation, not each generation, he's talking over thousands of years, millions of years, the necks get longer. So it's a little different than Lamarck. Lamarck actually had a big following. He just thought inherently things got longer. If I have a minute, I'll back up way back to Aristotle. So Aristotle is at the academy, Plato dies, he doesn't get the head job. And he's mad about it, and he's also kind of a threat to Plato's academy because he didn't get the top job, and there's some people there who think he should. He gets invited, let me get the fellow's name. He gets invited to Theophrastus, who was a great plant botanist, at least for that time in Greece. He invites him to his hometown, which is on the island of Lesbos. So Aristotle takes refuge there. Theophrastus concentrates on plants, and Aristotle starts looking at the animals. Aristotle, he's so smart, he's unbelievable. He says all these different animals, they have the same material, but there's something that's causing a rabbit to have a rabbit and a rat to have a rat. He goes, and he didn't have microscopes and he didn't know about DNA. But what he said is there must be some substance in there that follows a sequence. 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 2. He thought that this material had a sequence that caused this, that a rabbit would have the same sequence and a rat would have the same sequence. What he's describing is DNA. But he doesn't describe these things out of whole cloth. He invents basically the scientific method back then. He doesn't call it then, but he's observing and he's looking at things and he enjoys seeing the changes and the connections in nature. And the reason why I bring him up is that's the way Thoreau and Russell saw things. I get a quote here, I think I have it marked. Where yeah. I had him at my last place. Anyway, Emerson, who knew Russell, and Russell visited him in Concord, like I said, way before he knew Thoreau. Emerson describes Russell as not being a cabinet scientist. That's what they called collections at that time, the cabinet. He says he's all about the actions and reactions. That's the way Emerson described him. And that's the way I would submit Aristotle was. That Aristotle spent these 2 years. He wrote the greatest book on biology that was treated up until like the 1500s and was taught in universities. He learned dissection, all this stuff. And he came so close to predicting DNA. It's phenomenal. On January 1st, 1860, the Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, had been out for 1 month. It was published obviously over in Europe. But Asa Gray, as I said, was a friend of Darwin and got an advance copy. This fellow named Charles Brace was a cousin to Asa Gray and had spent Christmas and New Year's with him. And he grabbed The Origin of Species. Asa Gray had already read it and absorbed it. He had had it for a couple of weeks. And he brought it to a New Year's Day party in Concord. Wasn't a big party. It had Thoreau, Franklin Sanborn, Bronson Alcott, and Brace. So 4 of them, they're sitting around a table. They're kind of sober people. Thoreau didn't drink much. And they're talking books, they're having an intellectual conversation, and Brace pulls out this book. And so Thoreau was among the first 3 or 4 people in the country to have read The Origin of the Species. Thoreau grabbed the book. He took the book, he took it home, and he kept the book for a few weeks until copies of it was starting to come to America. So it hadn't even come to America. When he did get his, it was underlined 2, 3 times. What he loved about Darwin was the way Darwin looked at nature, saw the processes of nature. Going back to Aristotle, Aristotle made a mistake about a thing. He looked at eels and he couldn't find the reproductive organs of eels. He could find the reproductive organs of everything. So he thought eels somehow spontaneously came out of the sand. Thoreau was faced with kind of a same situation. There was a lot of plants where they couldn't figure out how they regenerated, how they got from this place to that place. But Thoreau, he just sat in the woods and he watched it. He watched the blue jays bringing the acorns into the pine forest. He just watched how everything moved around. So he got an answer to these things. Horace Greeley was a progressive guy down in New York, and he would publish some of Thoreau's nature thing. And Horace Greeley was one of these people who believed in this spontaneous generation of things. And Thoreau wrote, no, there has to be a seed, there has to be something, the way they're formed. They can't spontaneously generate. By the way, Aristotle's eels, it turns out they develop their organs as they swim out to sea to spawn, and so they don't have them when they're back on labos. It's only when they go to sea that they develop them. So there's always an answer for it, and that's Thoreau's attitude, you know.
Never heard of
Someone so smart has Agassiz with such a big, he would look for the magic answer,
it.
you know, and Thoreau wouldn't. Well, anyway, Thoreau gets the book, loves it, believes it. Same thing with Asia Gray. But other people didn't, like Louis Agassiz. And I'll tell you one more story. So Louis Agassiz is, after 1860, he becomes a promoter of this fighting. He becomes the main person to fight against Darwinism. And the young graduate students in his coterie, they don't like it. They don't accept it. They believe in Darwin. So where do they go? They leave Louis Agassiz and they come to the Essex Institute here in Salem, Peabody, 6 of them. And they establish a progressive publishing house. And so for new botanists and people who are developing Darwin's theories, etc., they publish, and they have a successful publishing house here. One of those fellows was a fellow named Morse, you see down at the PEM. We have the Morse Auditorium. He was one of the defectives from Louis Agassiz's laboratories. All right, so I think we've done the hour.
So, there are many adventures out in Salem Woods, Friends of Salem Woods and Salem Native Nurseries. Have you actually discovered some of the more unique and rare plants that John Lewis Russell was finding with his adventures with Thoreau? Have you discovered like the hanging fern or the climbing fern or the rare lilies and from some of these kettle ponds? Or do you have a
Not
favorite?
so, I mean, that's something I intend to do. I would say, there are better people for that than me around Salem. Gene Steller wrote a great compendium of what's up at Salem Woods. Bruce Piper, who was trained in college, where's Bruce? Oh, there he is. He's always amazing me about the plants he knows up there and the Latin names he knows and all. And then we have a young star, Sean Small, and through iNaturalist, he has published how many plants, Bruce? Hundreds that he's found in Salem Woods. So
That's great.
but so there's that. The other big star in Salem is John Robinson. In 1890, he published, did I bring it with me? Yeah. He published this book, The Flora of Essex County, Massachusetts. He was another guy down at the Essex Institute, took care of their library, etc. So he published what was here, and I did look through it to see if the climbing fern was here in Essex County. He doesn't record it, so that might be why John Lewis Russell was so hot to go row and see his climbing fern. What you got?
You mentioned the lead mills. Why are they called the lead mills?
Well, I think that was a pencil factory.
But they didn't find any of the minerals there.
No,
Okay.
It was a grinding operation. They ground and it was the largest in the country at one point, I think, and like 6,000 tons of lead and mostly went into paint.
It was a title.
Primary paint.
A tidal
It was using a tidal mill there to run the.
Oh, okay,
grinding
sure.
operation.
Yeah.
I was trying to find when did they build the lead mills out there? Would Thoreau have seen the lead mills?
About yes, you would have,
So that was 1858 when they walked there.
yeah, it was still, it operated all the way from, I think, the 30s, 1830s, like 1838 or something.
Yeah, it's also roughly around the same time as Num Keg Mills does. 'Cause it's all
Yeah,
built in
yeah,
at once.
yeah.
Where in Salem is that?
Just on the Marblehead line, driving to Marblehead,
114.
just on your left,
Okay.
just as you start going up the hill
Yep.
by the, St. Andrew's Church.
Yeah, those-
On the left, just in there, and I think there's still a Keep the Peace sign warning.
And I think there's a trail
Yeah,
sign.
it's right.
That's what, yes, we went there.
There is an old photo of showing that mill still in existence along the road.
It's huge.
Yeah, that
They're
plaque
huge.
with that photo is actually in the Washington Square Park that's in, our Washington Street Park, Lafayette Street Park.
Oh, yeah.
The triangular park that's in front of, the old Archdiocese Church, that's now, you know, Daily Table and all that. There's the South Salem historical plaque, and that image of the lead mills is on that plaque.
Oh, cool.
Wow.
You can still find the crucibles on the beach 20 years ago.
Really?
No kidding.
What?
Holy moly. Very
Wow.
wow. They were forging the
Wow,
lead.
they were
Wow.
those kind of ceramic, weird little,
Bowls,
were they ceramic or were they weren't,
oh, they were ceramic.
they were ceramic, yeah, cool.
Wow, wow.
Very cool.
There was some poured the lead into each one.
Yeah, yeah, wow, cool.
Yeah,
They make ammunition there?
they did, they used the lead also for ammunition, that was the other primary use for it. Yeah, so
Civil War.
between wars, we made paint.
I wonder with the pencils, because there's Joseph Dixon out of Marblehead that invented the Dixon
Oh, the
pencil.
Dixon pencil.
Yeah, like Ticonderoga, Dixon, yeah. And he was the one that pioneered graphite instead of lead as being the thing.
Yeah, much preferred.
Much, yeah.
Smarter.
Great,
So
great.
I wonder if the Rose Pencil Company.
Undoubtedly.
Had some connection or.
Well, John Goff, had a little article, in that Free Sunday paper 20 years ago, where he
Right.
talked about Thoreau and the pencils, and he made some connection to the owner of this lead mills, factory, like, they had a business connection at some point. But, Thoreau's operation was, a real boutique specialty thing. They had, excellent lead, from this family, small lead mine up in New Hampshire. They weren't involved with the mining of it. They would get it.
Right.
And it worked for them. They only had like 4 people at any time working for them, really small, like out in the shed in the backyard.
Oh, that's so cool. And some of the best pencils in the world came out of a shed. In the
Yeah.
backyard.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Hey,
Thank you.
yeah.